Before you spend $1 on renovation, ask one question. Will the market actually pay you back? In today's real estate market here in the Greenville area, sometimes a $4,000 paint and lighting refresh can actually outperform a $40,000 kitchen, but it really depends on what the market says and understanding how to read it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to read our local market in 3 minutes, which projects do and don't pay in and around our Five Forks area, Simpsonville area, and a simple framework to decide where to invest. Now, in the link below, you can grab my Five Forks high-end seller renovation ROI guide and cost payback calculator. The link's in the description, and it will help you plug in real numbers for your house. And if you like a transparent local guidance, hit subscribe. I post weekly strategies for Simpsonville, Mauldin, Greer, and the greater Greenville area, and would love to connect. Hey, it's Bill Stewart with the Bill Stewart Homes team, and we're here in Five Forks, Simpsonville, South Carolina, and help homeowners in the Five Forks and surrounding communities sell smarter by matching upgrades to what the market is actually rewarding right now. So when we're getting ready to get a house on the market, we start making, advice on what to enhance, update, upgrade. National headlines do not sell the house. A local micro market does. And that's why we always want to start with a 3-minute market check. And what we're looking at specifically is we want to be cognizant and aware of what's the month supply of inventory. So what that means is basically your absorption rate, and it's a variety of different things, but the idea that your total current active market, how many listings are available right now, and taking the average monthly sales for your area specifically and dividing it in there, and it comes out and it gives you a number. So it really is a good indicator. And when we start looking at where are we at in terms of how strong or weak is the market, when we're under 2.5 months worth of inventory, what that is a seller leaning market. So when we're in those kinds of things, then at that point, we can probably get by with minor refreshes within a home as opposed to doing any sort of major renovations. 3 to 4 months supply, we start moving more into a balanced market, which means that there's buyers and sellers are kind of in equilibrium. And so we want to be, selective about the projects that we're doing, but we also want to make sure that the home itself is super polished to help it stand out against its competition. And then when we're over 4 months, we're really moving into, at that point, we're starting to move into a buyer leaning market. So we really only want to spend, we only want to spend on big renovations if it actually solves an objection that we feel the buyer is going to have, or that it helps to leapfrog you against the competition that's already there. So when we're looking at, we want to also be cognizant of things like days on market and price reductions. If the days on market's rising in reduction and price reductions are becoming more common, then buyers are choosy. So we really want to focus on high impact, low risk refreshes. The other is we want to take a look at the segment. So in Five Forks specifically, your average can be somewhere between 400 all the way up, but even when you want to really understand your pricing segment and kind of get an idea. So, the $400,000 to $800,000 price bracket within our area, and then compare that to the broader Greenville market. How do the days look, across Greenville, as well as, what are buyers actually rewarding sellers in this current market, both from a broad sense as well as from a micro market sense. And that will help us to be able to figure out what it is that we need to do in order to get done. So, why does this matter? Well, your market position dictates your renovation risk tolerance. And in a seller leaning pocket, speed to market and polish wins, but in a softer pocket, quality and differentiation wins. So, but only where that math works on your side. So Pinterest boards they don't appraise. Your buyers and your comps do. All right, so we want to talk about the 4R framework, and the R word being, basically repair, refresh, refinish, or replace. So we really only want to escalate when the next R moves the proceeds needle. So we're looking at repair. These are kind of what I would consider your always, which is anything that's concerning health and safety, moisture, your roof, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, minor wood rot, sticking doors, nail pops, caulk, cracked tiles, fogged window panes. These are deal killers, and they also, like, a lot of times these are going to be things that will flare up in an inspection anyway. So we recommend always having these things fixed. Now, when we're looking at refresh, usually what this works out to be, refreshes are kind of your best ROI driver. And so those would be things like, how does the paint look inside the house? What's the color? What's the sheen? You know, staying more towards the white spectrum, and it gives a clean feel within the property, as well as, you know, looking at, you know, if it's semi-gloss. I'm not a big fan of semi-gloss. I think it's just so shiny. It shows all imperfections on the wall. So really kind of staying more towards a flat side. I prefer eggshell just because I think that it's easier to keep clean. You know, you get kind of the benefits of a flatter sheen, as well as the ability to actually clean it, where flat, it seems like it picks up everything. Looking at lighting swaps, cabinet hardware, faucets, mirrors in the bathrooms, you know, in and around the house. Things like switch and plug plates, landscaping, pressure washing, doing a deep clean. You know, how does the grout look? Does it need to be brightened up? You know, and then at that point also walking through and having it be where we can do some light staging to, like, really, you know, enhance kind of the feel of that home as they come in. And I feel that these things drive, you know, very low cost items that drive kind of a very large ROI in the market currently. Now what we're looking at is when we want to talk about refinishing. So we want to be selective on these things. So let's talk about, like, looking at hardwood floors. Do they need to be refinished? Are they okay? How does that look? Driveways, a lot of times, you know, you've pressure washed over time. Did they reseal that driveway? Does it need to have some repairs or things like that? You know, the idea that somebody pulls up to the home, that's going to be one of the first things they see. And driveways actually do, like, they are pretty important. Cabinets, do they need to be repainted? Do they need to be refinished? Looking at your tub and showers, you know, are they fiberglass? Do they need to be, you know, replaced? Do they need to, depending on what they're made of, do they need to be reglazed? You know, and then looking at the garage itself, you know, is it worth doing the garage epoxy, depending on what competition's doing? So it's really great to do these things when the existing materials are already, like, the quality's there, but they just may look tired. And then we start talking about replace. So this is more where we start going in and actually, like, surgically, like, helping to revamp the home. So what we're looking at is, how do the countertops look? How do the vanities in the bathrooms look? You know, is the glass door to the shower, is it going to be a builder basic shower door, or is it more, you know, does it need to be enhanced? And we only really want to recommend this if it solves an objection that appears, like, in your comp data, or through photos or things like that, as we're analyzing who our competition is. So, rule of thumb, you know, when we come down to kind of like what's determined here, if your market, you know, how are we going to dissect this budget, right? So if the market is, say, less than 2.5 months and we're in a seller's market, 80% of the budget that you are putting in really needs to go into the refresh. 20% of that, the dollar amount that you're putting in, should go into, like, making sure that all the repairs are done. If we're within 3 to 4 months, you know, as we start moving more into a balance side, then at that point we want to take, you know, our budget to look at 60% of that should go towards the refinish, you know, a refresh, sorry. And then 25% of that should go towards your refinish. So now at this point, how do we update? How can we really stand out? And then obviously we want to focus on the minor repairs that also need to be done. So the rest of your budget, that 15%, should go there. And then if we're in a buyer's market where it's greater than 4 months, we really need to lead with differentiators. So we're looking at lighting, paint, floor refinish, staging, and then really focusing on the price strategy. So we're really only replacing things at this point that would eliminate a clear block that we're seeing, whether it's through comps or just feedback from buyers as a whole. So, you know, I would say when we're talking about the projects that usually pay and some of those that don't, you know, for homes here in Five Forks, Simpsonville, you know, here's where we tend to see the best payback, assuming, a pro level execution on the actual work and those kinds of things, as well as like making sure that we're creating a cohesive design in the house. So, here are things where it's like, these are weekend wins, like things that you can pretty much do on your own that really do drive high ROI, which is interior paint, making sure that I see where a lot of times we talk about touch-ups, depending on where it is, if you're doing touch-ups and it's on a single wall, sometimes that's not a big deal. But if you've got touch-ups across the board, I would just recommend repainting the entire room and looking at staying closer to the white as bright of a paint that you can get, staying in the white or white shades. And I would really highly recommend like the eggshell for the wall to help kind of, give that flat look. But then, when you're starting to do your trim, making sure that, like it's not just the walls that matter now, it's making sure that your trim's in there. And I would recommend semi-gloss on that. It makes that room kind of pop. Lighting, swapping out dated cans or light fixtures. I see, there's a bunch of different lighting that you can walk in and be like, yep, I remember when that was in the 80s or 90s. The idea that lighting fixtures themselves are, it makes a big difference moving up. You've got can lighting where it's the incandescent or the LED bulbs that screw into it. Nowadays, like you're starting to see more of the flush mounts. And so at that point, like I would recommend like looking at potentially updating those because of the fact that the older cans start to get dirty. They start to, it starts to date the home. And at that point, it definitely adds a much more fresh appeal when they walk in and it's that flush mount. Looking at your current fixtures, things like your kitchen sink or kitchen faucet, bathroom faucets, all of those things. Look, if you have lighting or can lighting, going back to the lighting side, if you're going to look at things like, is a dimmer appropriate in this position versus that position? It's not necessarily something that, would necessarily completely hold it back, but it is a nice to have for buyers. And it's one less thing that they have to worry about. Looking at your hardware and fixtures, really, making sure like the drawer pulls, your tower racks, all of those things, looking and seeing kind of like what are the things that are the most appealing. What I see a lot of matte black. I see a lot of like satin brass, satin gold, satin pewter or silver, polished nickel, making sure really the key is whatever you decide in terms of hardware itself, that it should be cohesive in look. So if you've got, polished nickel, the polished nickel, the faucet, but you've got, matte black everywhere else, the idea is that it might be to your benefit to kind of tie all those things together. Curb appeal, looking at mulch refresh, pruning your bushes and your trees and things like that to really, give a good sense and be able to allow people to see the front of the property kind of unobstructed. If it's, as we start moving into fall here, the idea of like put some pop of color on that front door or outside, it creates a much more like somebody sees that and they feel it's a warm look and it creates a warm feel to buyers. And the other thing is like front doors. If you're like me, I don't use my front door very often. I typically go through my garage. So I'm not really paying attention to what the front door looks like, especially up close. But I do see a lot of times where it's like, man, if that front door would have been painted, it would have set a whole different tone walking in. And as silly as that sounds, it's the little things that really matter in that. And I would highly recommend, just going through and at that point doing a touch up of paint on the door. When we're looking at the idea of clean lines across the board make a big difference to buyers. So, we talked about new switch plates, plug plates, have those things. If white, especially if you've gone through and you've painted, now you've got, new switch plates. And if the plugs themselves, once you put the new switch plates on, they look like they're faded or that they started to get that sun damage. The idea of putting a new plug in makes a big difference. It just really like sets the tone in each room. Door latches, making sure that all the doors close the way that they're supposed to, and that at that point that they're easy. So making sure not just that the latches close and open, but then that point, like, make sure that the hinges are aligned so that the door, sometimes it's just the fact that over time the door is kind of, just needs to be readjusted to fix that. But when somebody walks in and they can't get a door open, or over time, if it starts to sag and now it's creating kind of swipe lines across your flooring, those things I would definitely, it's to your benefit to get done, as well as looking at all of your caulk lines in the bathrooms, kitchens, anywhere where there's going to be water or potential water penetration, making sure that, it's fresh, it's clean, and that it's actually it's all there and doing what it's supposed to do. And then we want to look at staging and layout. This is a lot of times, we talk about staging. We recommend at times hiring a professional stager to come in depending on what's happening, just because of the fact that empty homes have kind of it's a tougher feel. And especially when you start moving into a buyer's market where, you've got a lot more competition. So I would say, looking at staging, if you've got furniture in the house, just basically it's the idea is that less is more a lot of times. Moving kind of bigger pieces out of the way. If you got a great size living room and you've put 2 sectional sofas in there, it's great when you're living there. It's a little hard for buyers to understand the actual size of that room without having that furniture removed. So I would recommend pulling some of that stuff back. Now, whether it goes in the garage or into a storage unit or wherever you're going to put it, the idea that it makes sense. My wife and I, we had a weird kind of kitchen living room combo in one of our houses where the kitchen kind of bled into the living room, which we put, how we staged our furniture worked great for us. But when we were selling our home, the idea is that we didn't really want to accentuate the fact that that room bled in and that it was, that the 2 rooms didn't really have a complete break. So we wanted to show off the size of the room and kind of leave it to the imagination. So we had to move some furniture out and put it into storage, which actually worked to our benefit. But it was one of those, I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it had we not been advised to do it. So, making sure that the other is outside of taking furniture out and minimizing is that keep it as neutral as possible, if you've got the more things that you can take out that are just kind of cohesively work within the color scheme within the house, that's great. The other is that, basically making sure that you're also kind of minimizing the number of say what I call knickknacks in throughout the house, really just kind of, keeping it as simple and clean as possible. So the other is now when we start talking about mid-ticket polish moves, often these things we see that the polish moves themselves can actually pull back anywhere between 80 to 150% of payback if the comps are rewarding it. So when we talk about that, that's going to be more your things like hardwood refinish, or if you are looking at the hardwoods and saying maybe determining whether or not it's a good idea to do a color shift. Depending, you bought the house 20 years ago, hardwoods were a one color, and now all of a sudden you're starting to see more of the kind of either pickle look or grays, darker browns, those kinds of things. Might not necessarily be a bad idea to, at that point, update, because that is what buyers are going to want to do. They may love the floors, but they don't like the color. Now it comes down to how much is that going to cost. So I would recommend, looking at that, but really advising and asking questions. Do you need to do that? The other is we see a lot of luxury vinyl plank, out there. And so the idea that over time, those things can get damaged, and making sure that those things are, replaced, and that you're able to do it. Now, the problem with when you start trying to line things up is, a repair sometimes is going to be a bit of a challenge because maybe they've discontinued the color or the look or the feel. This would be something where you'd really have to just kind of think it through. How bad is the damage? All of those things. But the idea is that you also want to make sure that you don't have a lot of different floor composites. So you're not, tile here and then hardwood here. Too much change in the flooring can be a turnoff to buyers. So it may be one of those things, depending on how you've got it. If you're looking at kind of a polish move, this may move more into kind of your big ticket, which we'll get into here in a second. When we're looking at cabinets, we're kitchen cabinets, bathroom cabinets, we want to take a look and see, is it worth it to repaint or refinish these things to kind of keep it up? If you've got real dark wood, it can make it seem smaller, going in a lighter tone. That mix with, depending on what your countertops are, if you've got, laminate countertops, but the comps in your area are saying that buyers are really going after either granite or quartz, that you should really look at, potentially that may be a conversation to take a look at that. And then at that point, taking a look at your backsplashes, both in the bathrooms and the kitchen. Does something need to be updated there in order to be able to keep up? Some of these things can be, you're kind of moving on the border where I would say these are expensive. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be, incredibly expensive, but there'll definitely be an investment that needs to come into this if that's the path that you need to do in order to keep up. Primary bath, like taking a look at, a light refresh. Now, these things, the biggest mistakes that I see here is, you've got 20-year-old light fixture sitting over top of the vanity. You've got a beautiful double vanity. You've got the great space, but in general, as soon as I walk in, I already know, it's 20 years old. So looking at things like your lighting fixtures, your mirrors, your faucets, your door pulls, similar to your kitchen. If the cabinets themselves, just, the idea of a refresh or a repaint can make a huge difference. And then just changing the hardware, which is not super expensive. And then looking at your caulk and grout lines, making sure that they're all kind of done. And if they need to be, freshened up or cleaned, I would highly recommend that too. So when we're looking at the laundry room or the mud room, you're seeing where buyers are really like the idea of having counter space. Some like sinks. I mean, you can't fix everything. And if that's not possible, I wouldn't say, but those are the things where it's like, there's actually storage in the mudroom, that there's counters where somebody can work, that it's not just for the washer and dryer, and it basically allows them to be able to actually use it as a working room. So I would look at those things and say that, buyers really are looking at those, like, how is this going to be livable for me? And I think that those things make a big sense. So the other is things like hooks, like being able to possibly hang things up in there, whether it be jackets, whether it be things that are drying, just like little touches like that. I think that they go a long way, and definitely buyers do notice that. And then the other is taking a look at your garage presentation. Is there storage in the garage itself? Does it make sense? Is it clean? Are the walls themselves finished? Are they unfinished? In terms of, especially in new builds, you see a lot of of garages that are unfinished. It's kind of got a weird feel to it. I think that's one of the idea of a finished and painted walls within the garage. While you don't spend a huge amount of time in there, it does make a big impression. And then the other is like evaluating whether or not is it worth to seal those floors in the garage. You see a lot of interested parties that are very drawn to like the fact that, the floors, the epoxy's down. The epoxy makes it very easy to clean. You don't see stains, you can clean those stains, and it just kind of, I guess finishes the entire home, when at the end of it, it feels like everything is kind of, there was a purpose and intention to where it is. So when we start talking about big tickets, I would highly recommend this is one where you would really need to like proceed carefully with, which is when we start looking at things like full kitchen guts, moving walls around, creating room additions, pool installs. In my opinion, pools don't sell homes. They can help to sell homes, but they don't add a huge amount of value, not to everybody in those things. So it's one of those, like, making sure that you're making smart projects, unless it's one of those things where you're looking to live in the house. If it's a upgrade that you're doing for yourself, and at that point making the home more livable for you, great. I mean, it's an added benefit, but it's one of those, just be very cautious when you're going down these, because not only can these, if you are looking to sell, these can have a delay in terms of market timing, and they rarely do return 100% in the short term. So really, you only want to consider like major overhauls of a current layout or function, basically, unless it's something where it's like, it's severely going to impact the house, and that you really want to make sure that you're like, months on market, and that the market itself would actually like justify having that work done and the expectation of what you get back. So your real goal here is cohesion. So 5 smart, like $1,000 to $3,000 moves that tell one design story will beat a single $30,000 project that's bolted onto 2016 finishes. All right, so real quick tip: if you update one finish in a room, chase the sight lines. What does the eye hit next, and make that consistent? All right, so what we want to talk about now is what not to do, right? Is basically making personal or polarizing choices right before listing, like making like a bold accent tile, crazy colors, or I should say too big, too bright, too bold of colors. Looking at partial updates that highlight what you didn't change, new counters on visibly dated cabinets without painting or refacing them. I see that happen a lot where it's great that you got the stone, but man, I'm still going to have to replace all those cabinets. When you're doing things with major implications in terms of structure or the idea of making additions, that I see, sometimes where sellers that they've done the work themselves and they skip the permit. This can impact your closing. So make sure that if you're going to do major overhauls, that you're going through the right process, that you've got the right documents and permits so that you can pass those over, and that you had certified workers and licensed workers actually doing that work. Otherwise, it can impact. Starting late, like contractors and photography and staging take calendar time. So you really want to plan backwards from your launch day to say, hey, you know what? We're going to go on the market in 3 months. So at this point, we have to do these things, and setting together a plan of action where everybody's aligned and making sure that those things hold true, so that at that point you're able to follow the correct, that they can follow each step. I think it also, once you have a plan and a schedule, makes it a lot easier to digest for anybody really, when you know what kind of the plan is and what that workload is going to look like, versus trying to scramble to do everything in a shortened time frame where it's almost set up for failure. The other is basically ignoring energy or insurance flags, things like old water heaters, missing GFCIs. I see this a lot with homes, especially here with homes that are a little bit older, that the GFCI plugs are not in the kitchen or bathrooms the way that they're supposed to be, and making sure that those things are done. It becomes very costly when you have to have an electrician after an inspection, that you have to get a licensed electrician to come out and install GFCIs. I've seen it where it's $75. It could be $100 per outlet in the necessary areas. So getting ahead of that ahead of time, you can kind of control your cost. The other is looking at your HVAC, making sure that your filters are clean, that your intake and outtakes on your venting are also clean, and that the unit, both inside, like air handler, and the outside unit, that they've had, service, they've been updated. The other is, we just had a house this week where we recommended going through and having the actual ductwork cleaned out, because the house is 25 years old. It has not been taken care of. It had those things that they'd never had the actual ductwork cleaned out. And I mean, over time, it's those kinds of things where it's like, it's better to get it cleaned out. It helps from an overall maintenance, less dust, less issues. And at that point, it's completely clean. So anyway, what I find is just that if the first thing a buyer says when they walk in is that we'll redo this later, then they'll also say, we'll also pay less for it now. All right. And so, outside of like the updates and upgrades, what about the things that you've already done? So you may already have value sitting in the house. The main thing is that you just need to package it. So when you're building an upgrade or service log, one of the biggest things that I see is kind of this itemized thing about the updates that have happened. It's a great bulleted sheet that I think is good for buyers to be able to see all the work that it's done. But it's important that if you've done, upgrades within the home, that you understand the item that was upgraded, the brand, the model, that was done. What was the approximate date? Who did the work? Is there a warranty or a receipt? Can the warranty be transferred? And then at that point, like kind of what was it about that upgrade that mattered? Looking at your systems, making sure that you're highlighting the age of the roof, HVAC age, as well as like when was it last serviced, water heater, the age, when was that looked at last, windows, the idea of like, where have you updated your windows? These are things that buyers may not necessarily notice when they walk in. They'll notice that the windows aren't in good order, but they don't necessarily know that you just got done redoing all of the windows. And so again, what kind of windows, which windows were replaced, what was the brand of the windows, like who installed it, those kinds of things. And then the next is like looking at lifestyle. which is, what other enhancements have you done? Is there any smart home gear in the property? This may or may not appeal to every single buyer, but the idea that it's, I think it says a lot, when somebody has taken the effort to basically try to make it smart. Whether they utilize it or not is up to them. What's the, do you have irrigation? How many zones is that irrigation? When was the last time that irrigation was checked out? Garage storage. Where it would have you added any storage to that garage that may not have been there when you first moved in? The other is things like, have you had the garage door itself resurfaced? When was the last time that the spring was replaced? Those kinds of things. Because I've moved into 2 houses, and like in the last 2 houses that we've had, within the first 18 months of moving into that house, our garage door spring broke. It happened in a house in Florida. It happened here when we moved into Five Forks. It wasn't even all that old, but it obviously, like, it is an expense, and it's also a real pain when, you wake up in the morning and you're trying to figure out why you can't get the garage door open. So I think those are good. And then the other is, do you have closet systems or things like that in the closets, like in the master bedroom? Did you build out a closet storage system? The idea that those are kinds of things that do appeal to buyers. And if they're already there, then at that point it does add value versus just the standard wire shelving. If you've got, really nice built-ins and things like that they're good. We're going to turn this into a 1-page upgrade highlight sheet, and we'll weave it into photos, captions, and the property website. But basically buyers pay more confidently when they can see, what's been done and when. All right. So, basically, like, we've talked a lot about all of these things, but how is this working? And basically, are there examples that we can find? So, we work very closely with our sellers. In fact, we are constantly making, we do a pre-walk. Even after we do our first, like, actual walk of the property, we like to come back a couple days later to really then at that point walk and help sellers get ready for photos by doing pre-staging or making any recommendations. Because when it is like on that first time when you walk in, you're kind of overwhelmed. The first time that you see a home, and then when I can get back out into, all right. So when we're looking at how all of this comes together, like, this all sounds great, Bill, except for the fact that, like, does it actually work? And I can tell you that it does. Especially, we've had several different. We basically make recommendations all the time with home sellers when homeowners, when we're getting their homes ready for market. And, we basically, like, a lot of times it could be as low as like a $5,000 investment. It could be even lower than that. It could be higher than that. But the idea is that we already have a plan. So I can give you, basically 2 examples. One, we just recently did what I would consider a refresh route on a property here in Simpsonville, where we knew that there was going to be a couple of different things that needed to be done. We went through, we changed out light fixtures. We did have paint redone throughout the house. We called a professional cleaner to come in and do a complete, like, just a soup to nuts, go through, like, deep clean it. Everything had been redone. There was some issues with the deck that we needed to get done. We had somebody come out and change out the actual support beams. We had seen over time that there was water damage in terms of wood rot. I knew that was going to pop up in an inspection. We had several other things in terms of, like, making sure that there was things that we knew that needed to be done that were going to pop up in an inspection. So it worked out to be, I don't know, probably like 20 different things that we worked with that home seller on. And I think our budget was less than $5,000 to get all of that stuff put together. Once we got done, we ended up, going on the market on a Saturday, which is kind of outside of what I normally would do. And literally by that afternoon, we had a full price offer, and that house closed 33 days later. The seller was super happy. We had built in on the net sheet, what this was going to look like, how we were. There was a couple of minor things they asked for us to take care of in terms of repair. I think overall that seller walked with about $6,500 all in between updates and repairs, and really ended up walking with more than they expected. As our plan initially was just to sell it fast, we ended up selling it for, I would say, we probably would have only gotten somewhere in about the 420, 425 range in the current condition. That investment ended up driving us up, and we ended up selling that at 450, and really a very, very smooth transaction. However, on the other side, when we start looking at a heavy lift, we're working on a property right now. And at the end of it, it's a beautiful home in a great location here in Five Forks. It's moderately priced. I know it'll have a lot of appeal. The issue, though, is that it needed a little bit more heavy lifting in the fact that the house itself is about 25 years old. And so, when we're looking at, laminate, kitchen, countertops, it's not that the laminate's really a problem. The problem with it is that it's also stained, so it needs to be either replaced or repaired. And so we're quoting out right now to take a look at what would it be if we wanted to do granite countertops in here. We could repaint refinish the cabinets, which are a good quality cabinet, but it's a dated look. It's a dated look in terms of what it is. If we could brighten up that kitchen a little bit more. The other is that the carpet is probably 16 years old and it definitely needs to be taken. We could stretch it and try to mask it, but the reality is what's the cost and what's the return? And so looking at those things, we've had a lot of different stuff done from a landscaping perspective. We had it pre-inspected before we even went on the market to take a look at how is the roof, how is HVAC, are there going to be any surprises that we're going to need to know about outside of this, so that therefore we are pretty confident when we hit the market that we know that the product itself is, not that it's going to be perfect, but that we have covered most of the big bases. Right now, that investment is probably going to be about $25,000 for the homeowner. But the reality is that when it comes down to what they could sell for in current condition versus where we're going to go to in market, even that $25,000 investment, we feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to get back the return, but it's all because we looked at comps as we went in. I wouldn't ask a home seller to invest 25 grand unless I was confident that we were going to be able to get it back. So they see it, understood it. And I think that we're already starting to get a buzz on that property as to what's the activity level that they can see in and around that home. They know the neighbors know something's going on, but they're not sure exactly what yet. And so I am excited about having that one done, but it's one of those, it could be, it is a big investment for that seller knowing where it is. But I feel like based off of the comps and what we should expect from a days on market. The other is that I feel our pricing strategy is very strong. And so when we worked out the net sheet, between going to market as is to where they are now, he stands to net, 25,000 more even after these repairs. So he gets 100% ROI on the money that he puts back in. And ultimately we can get that job done probably in less than 10 days once we get all of the quotes and all of the materials put in. So, 9 times out of 10, for homes that are here in the Five Forks area, basically the path A wins in terms of speed, certainty, and net. You really want to make sure that you've got a solid plan if you're going to go in the path B of the heavy lift, and make sure that you have a clear understanding of what that's going to do before you're going. And sometimes that can mean doing nothing and just being happy with whatever it is that market's going to allow you to bear. But it's, it really comes down to making sure you've got the right prescription for the problem versus just going off and doing it and expecting to be able to get where it is. So when we're looking at, for us, as we get a home on the market, basically, we like to kind of set out, especially if we're going to have to do work in any way, is basically setting out a 30-day launch plan. So, really walking our clients through what that's going to look like. So we do a pre-listing walkthrough. We're looking at what it is. We're going to build out an ROI plan for any sort of projects that they have that we need to get done. We're going to look at making sure that we're ready for professional photographer, that we're going to basically try to book a date so that once we know that it's on the calendar, we know that we can work backwards from there. And then we're going to really start working on trying to figure out the contractors that we're going to need to hire to get done. We have a great vendor list, and we have a couple of different vendors that can do multiple things. So a lot of times for us, it's pretty quick because I can call this person to be able to do 5 of the things, and I can call this person to do 3, and we can get these done probably in 5 to 7 days. So sometimes it's not as long as 30 days, but we want to give ourselves some time to also breathe because it can be very overwhelming, and selling a home is not convenient. It's not always the most fun process. So, when we're looking at, that's day 0, kind of walking through getting everything all put together. our first week, in week 1, we're going to be looking at repairs. So we're going to be, what's the HVAC service? Is there anything with the roof? All those little small fixers that we're trying to order and make sure that we've got the materials and fixtures that we need in order to be able to get started. The second week, we're really focusing on paint, lighting and hardware swaps. What's the curb appeal? How clean is the home? Getting a deep clean done. Week 3, we're going to be looking at, staging and that final punch list of items that we need to get done before we go to market. If we're going to do any upgrades, that we've got that assembled, we understand that we have it listed. We're starting to build out those materials for buyers as well to be able to communicate what's been done, how it's been done, who did it, what are they? And then we're going to come back out and start doing what's considered a pre-shoot styling of the home or a small staging to make sure that the house is ready for the photographer, because in week 4, that's when we're going to come out and make sure that we've got the photos and the video. We're going to walk through and reanalyze our market to make sure that our pricing strategy is still 100% locked in. And then we're going to look at potentially, I like to launch on Thursdays, because at that point, that gives a couple days before the weekend. Midweek, it just feels like somewhere between Wednesday and Thursday is a great day to go live. And so at that point, we've got all of the photos back, where all of our copies been written, all of our marketing materials have been put together. And then at that point, we're ready to go for live. We look at booking potentially an open house that weekend as we start getting going to really get out there. And then at that point, we're going to create a communication and feedback loop with our clients to make sure that they are understanding of what's happening when every showing, what's the feedback, what are buyers saying, and things that they need to be aware of. Because no matter how well prepared we are, there might be something that we missed. And that feedback is super critical in order for us to be able to not only fix the problem, but stay ahead so that future showings don't have those issues. So, I feel like this 4-week or 30-day plan really helps us keep momentum and really preserves the calendar for our clients. Make sure that they understand what to expect, when to expect it. We're busy, people are busy between school schedules, work schedules, and just life in general. The idea of having a predictable schedule and understanding exactly what's going on and doing it in a time frame that's digestible to everybody that's involved, I think makes a world of difference. So anyway, if you want, some help choosing just the projects that pay for your address, download our free renovation ROI guide and the cost payback calculator below. It's built for us here in Five Forks. It can be used for anybody really, but the idea of the goal is really kind of navigating our local market. So it's built for homeowners here in this area, and really honestly, looking at a price bracket somewhere between $400 to $800, because that's kind of the average here in Five Forks. So you can kind of get an idea of what that return on investment would look like. And, if you want a second set of eyes, feel free, book a 15-minute call. I'd be more than happy to talk through anything that you have, answer any questions. And really, it's no pressure, no sales. It's whatever we can do to help, or at least guide. Or if you need to get in contact with somebody, you need to get this glass repaired and you don't know who to call, I'd be more than happy to give you a couple of suggestions. So feel free, and I would love to be able to help in any way. So anyway, but if this was helpful, tap like, subscribe, leave a comment, whatever it is. We do this on a weekly basis and would love to be involved and at that point be a source of any sort of value. And if you did get value, just let us know. Stay tuned. Next week's video, what we're going to do is talk about the pricing strategy for home sellers here and really how to win in the first 7 days in the market. So again, I'm Bill with the Bill Stewart Homes team, and we're right here in the Five Forks area. So thanks for tuning in, and if we can do anything, feel free to reach out, and look forward to talking to you again.